capital and critical play in the Eastern European independent games of the early 2000s on the, well, example and kind of this history and close reading of Julio Neige.
Okay.
So yeah.
Now I should present myself.
Yeah.
Okay. We rehearsed this many times, so yeah. This is my third presentation actually, so I'm sorry, like you have this feeling like, you know, I'm everywhere. You open the fridge and where you see me. This time it's another century again and another co-presenter. But normally I work at the Center of Excellence at the University of Turku. So Mateusz, back to you.
Yeah, so yeah, if you can move to next slide. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So just to briefly walk you through our game plan today. So first, Maria would provide this, well, historical background, which is I think is very important in this case, and provide some cultural context, and also I believe speak a little bit about the very rich and interesting development history of well, not only one version of the game, but well, like multiple versions across multiple platforms, I would say. Then I would provide close reading of the game and kind of walk you through the gameplay process. Then, yeah, we'll speak a little bit about the postmortem, about the, well, afterlife of this Julio Neige project, and yeah, we'll close with some hopefully fruitful conclusions. So yeah, back to Maria.
Okay, so now about the historical background. So the first iteration of the game was released in 2001, but all of the authors were born in the early 80s. So they grew up in the 1990s in Poland, which was a very kind of interesting period. We both with Mateusz also grew up in the same time. So we have our personal experience here. As well. So it was an interesting time of political transition, which most of you are, of course, aware, the fall of the communism and Poland joining the Western structures like NATO or European Union in 2004. But also it was a very fascinating period of cultural transition. Because before, when we had the Iron Curtain, it was very hard for the Western culture to leak in. Of course, it was happening, and we both, I think, with Mateusz, researched it in our previous works. However, you know, it was limited and it was difficult. So after the fall of communism, the 1990s were basically a time of catching up with the West. On the TV, you had like popular TV series from the 70s or from the 80s, like the A-Team, MacGyver, and whatnot, really. So in many ways for us, the generational experience of the 1990s was like of earlier decades in the West. So I think a good kind of symbol of that catching up was opening of the McDonald's in Warsaw in 1992, which was really a huge deal. And going to McDonald's was really something exceptional, which now makes me only laugh, but that was the case then. And I even doing research for the presentation found this picture from that opening in 1992, where you can see Jacek Kuroń, who was one of the leaders of the democratic opposition during the communist times. This sort of, you know, French dissident figure in a way, going to the opening of McDonald's. Of course, we don't know how critical he was or, you know, what was the context, but definitely he thought it's worth kind of seeing. So the catching up kind of narrative is a good summary of that period, at least when you look at the mainstream events. So as we spoke actually with Staszek Krawczyk in our presentation, the kind of main narrative of the development of the Polish game dev scene is very similar, that you had 80s, we were behind the Iron Curtain, so some limited homebrew, but it was really hard to get games, etc. Very similar to what Jarosław Szwelch describes in his book about Czechoslovak games. But then certain companies at the end of the 1990s, at the beginning of 2000s, managed to break through and have some commercial success in the West. So in a way, in many chapters about European, Eastern European games in the Wolf's book around the games around the world, you have this kind of narrative about that period. But from my perspective, I think it is, you know, missing a lot of smaller, like, you know, we spoke about it already during Afra Cares or in the discussion after Afra's keynote, that there are so many fascinating, you know, smaller histories that need to be told. And in this case, I'm having this approach similar to my previous studies with Paweł Grabarczyk when we were looking at the independent scenes. So the narrative mentioned before is this kind of AAA dream. But then you still had a lot of independent games being developed in Poland at that time. You had the homebrew scenes, 8-bit scenes that lasted remarkably until even late 1990s. TechBlast is the last game published for Atari 8-bit computers in Poland on a cassette tape. And then you have in these scenes in 2010s, Sos Sosowski, probably one of the most popular Polish creators of that scene. But what happened in between? You know, it wasn't a creative gap. Here I'm using a slide from our presentation with Paweł from Lunenburg, from DIGA from 2015, when we were talking like, you know, why wasn't Doom the first indie game and what happened in between the shareware indie and indie scenes. So what happened were this fascinating independent cultures happening in different countries, in different local languages. And I think this vibrant Eastern European pre-indie independent scenes of that era of transition are really fascinating to explore. And our paper is an attempt exactly at that. So Żółwionerze was developed by 3 colleagues from Kielce, which is like a middle-sized city in Poland, growing up together in the same neighborhood. One of them knew how to code, a little bit of Pascal experience, Turbo Pascal language, and then the C language. One knew how to draw. One knew a little bit about the music. He was even submitting some of his work to demo scene competitions. Like, you know, the influence of the demo scene, of course, in that era, in that area of the world is important. So they were all fans, had Amigas before, creating this game for PC. Yeah, well, there are some Amiga references further, so this is kind of topical. Quickly, you know, I was looking at other games of that era. It really seems that was some sort of cultural moment for, you know, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was really a big thing, at least in Europe, and you had different games in different countries on that topic as a kind of some big cultural influence. So this is a review from a Polish computer magazine from 2002 of this rather peculiar game for Dreamcast. However, it wasn't an inspiration for our game. A new version of Żółwionerzy, which is, by the way, like drunkard millionaires, basically, like bum millionaires, was released in 2002, rewritten in C++. And what is really interesting is the internet site and the fan following they already had. So it really kind of is reminiscent of what later happened with the indie scenes. Just, you know, a side note, they participated in this kind of demo scene compos, which really kind of anticipate the game jams of the next decade. They were trying some solutions online that are reminiscent of crowdfunding, so, and crowdsourcing as well. So this is really, really intriguing how it predates certain trends that happened later. back to Mateusz.
Yes, thank you. If you can please stop sharing your screen, because I have to switch to PowerPoint. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, because of some technical difficulties from my, on my side. Apparently, Google hates me, but yeah, it doesn't matter, because now, yeah, hopefully, yeah, you can see everything. So yeah, so first of all, it is important to note that I base this analysis on one of the most popular iterations of Jules Leger available for PC platform. It is, well, as we've already stated, designed to be a sort of a parody of a well-known British TV show format, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which Polish edition was aired, well, roughly at the time of the game's premiere. And its name, as we already also touched upon, Jules Leger, directly refers, well, to the Polish title of the show, Millionerzy, the millionaires. Jules is, of course, well, somehow derogatory term for someone who uses alcohol too much and as a result lives on the streets and asks people for money to buy alcohol. The game somehow, well, retains the mechanics of the millionaire game. We have questions with only one possible answer in the ABCD format. We have traditional lifelines like the 50-50, phone to a friend, ask the audience. As you can see in the top right corner, although they are all stylized to, well, to fit the alcohol theme of the game. And this theme is very much present in all of the game's, well, layers, so to speak. And one important note, the game does not show you the correct answer after you fail, which somehow adds to the replay value a little bit, and at the same time, well, differentiates Jules Leger from the TV show format. So yeah, moving to some key gameplay related elements. So we have questions which are selected somehow randomly from a difficulty tiered list. Developers ask their fans basically at one point to send them questions with the help of the quest editor. Then they will select the most fitting submissions and place them in the NG version of the game. This editor looks, yeah, quite simple. So the questions are very much rooted in the internet culture of that time, while, well, retaining a certain, as I've said previously, alcohol theme and vibe, and also occasional, a bit self-referential throwbacks to the beginnings of the, well, microcomputer scene in Poland. So, well, there are questions about the Napster, but also some obscure cheap wine brands, and even a question about the Amiga CPU power. So yeah, there's that. Yeah, as I've said, the interface is very much in line with the graphic conventions of a TV show. But there's also the issue of music and sound, which I would say are quite crucial to the experience. Jules Leger uses a looped disco polo song along with, well, occasional, let's call it voice acting for the Jules Leger's host character mainly. Yeah, the music is very much one of the important elements of this intertextual scaffolding that Jules Leger's gameplay is built upon. So we have this choice of well, music that is very telling. It is a song entitled Wine from a very, well, lowbrow disco polo publisher. And what is interesting here is that, well, these two characters that you see there are not musicians, but there are models hired to perform on stage during live shows. They also appeared on the cover of the cassette, as you can see. And so this goes on to show this kind of Jules Leger's playful take on selecting its pop cultural references. So even if the main theme of the song is quite obvious, it was not at the time mainstream disco polo hit. So in the game, this song kind of supports this playful performance that is enacted during each gameplay session, so to speak. There's also this important reference point for Julio Neige, and it's kind of recurring theme of pastiche-based intertextual gameplay. Is the very popular Polish iteration of, well, Married with the Kids formula and type of humor. It was the show entitled Świat według Kiepskich, which can be translated into The World According to the Kiepskis. And it employs, well, humor which sometimes is, well, equally playful and, well, subversive to some extent in its nature. So there are basically these three types of questions in Julio Neige. The first relies on the absurdity of some of the questions. They're usually the easiest ones, as well, either of the answers is, well, suggested. So basically either the answer is suggested in the question itself, or the 3 out of 4 options are just obviously false and are aimed to provide, well, a kind of humorous backdrop. So just like in this question regarding what is Nokia. So I won't, well, translate the options because I don't want to offend our Finnish viewers. But let's say that only one option out of the 4 is not blatantly outrageous or just straightforward offensive, albeit arguably in a playful and inventive way, if you have a high tolerance for this kind of humor, that is. So then these are the sets of questions which test the general knowledge of the players. Not all of them are difficult, but some require a significant, I'd say, familiarity with international TV shows broadcasted at that time on Polish TV, or they just refer to general knowledge, even like this one, which refers to a linguistic knowledge of sorts. Then there are some questions with well, I'd say significant degree of playfulness in them, which deal with the local issues. There are questions which, well, refer to important historical figures, books that students are, well, obliged to read from our, well, nation building and heartwarming literary canon, and this time more serious questions about Polish underground culture, like this Caliber 44 hip hop record. So this is kind of this mix of styles of sorts. And there's also a bonus tier of questions, which appears only when you reach the ending stages of the game. And they also, I would say, contribute to the, well, replay value of sorts, because they required a very non-obvious choices, and some degree of metagame knowledge is required basically to pass the test. So they're either very obscure and not intuitive, even if the question seems obvious, then the answers are, well, formulated in a way that is very obscure, or they are basically self-referential. For example, there are questions which there are questions about, you know, what brands of cigarettes that developers like the most. So this is kind of a, well, question that you're not supposed to know when you first play the game, I'd say. Okay, and moving to the, well, this more like a theoretical part of our presentation. So there's this notion by Flanagan of a critical play, and it combines means for, well, creative expression with games that engage in, and I quote, artistic, political, and social critique or intervention in order to propose ways of understanding larger cultural issues as well as the games themselves. And I would say that Julio Neige does just that. It can be read as a kind of a snapshot style meta commentary on the state of popular various discourses presented in Poland in the early 2000s. It is somehow conservative in its form, but can be potentially subversive in its execution. It also requires, well, a specific type of cultural capital, I would say. The game, well, fosters a particular type of intertextuality. based on, well, mainstream media outlets functioning at that time. For example, the media coverage of the most popular events. And the game very openly embraces this sort of media zeitgeist of the era. It presents a very, well, peculiar type of humor. It is, well, liberal on the, at least on the surface value level. It is not too progressive, but it is sometimes offensive. There are some anti-clerical themes, as well as some, well, potentially offensive remarks towards sexual minorities, especially if you read it from well, the current point of perspective. But they all contribute to this kind of cultural zeitgeist of the era. And, well, let's be frank, like this.
20 minutes. Could you wrap up, please?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'll just, yeah. And yeah, so there's also this partistic takes on Consalvo's notion of gaming capital. So, well, students who made the game know very well that their target audience is not necessarily all that familiar with the knowledge pertaining the exact, well, volume of alcohol of the cheapest wine segment. So it can be, I would say, read as kind of this mockery of the more traditional hereditary notion of gaming and cultural capital, as it has been presented in the works of Bourdieu or Mia Consalvo. Okay, and I guess
just go to the summary. So basically,
yeah.
I would say that there was a re-release for the Android, for the mobile platforms in 2012, and the game is still popular on that platforms, having sort of a cult following.
Yeah, and this slide basically sums up what we have already been saying to this whole presentation. Yeah, so Julien Hergé has this kind of critical and playful intervention with this, well, backdrops of vernacular intertextuality. And yeah, last but not least, it's very important to think of it as a very successful multi-platform endeavor, which is still kind of, well, present in the well, our many people's like memories of that time. And yeah, this is the slide with references. So yeah, thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, I guess sorry for going a little bit over time. It was
last slide, please.
Thank you both. Could you drop the